I think our textbook does the best job of any of the many great textbooks on the market of explaining corporate strategies from a diversification standpoint. Unfortunately, I think makes a big mistake when it rolls in the discussion of mergers and alliances and mergers and acquisitions and alliances into the same chapter and simply tries to pass them off as a way companies implement diversification strategies, because there's a lot more to M&As than that. But let's face it, M&As are the sport of kings and queens, and you see that on my quote on the bottom of the slide. These things are big, they're splashy, they're newsworthy, they make the Wall Street Journal all the time. They're just downright sexy. The question we're going to look at, though, is are they effective? And really, when is it? What conditions are under which are they effective? And how do you do it effectively, which is the key. Another important thing to keep in mind is not all M&As are alike. A lot of M&As are about consolidation. They're about two companies that do largely the same thing that are joined into one for any number of reasons. Then you have M&As as extensions. This is where a company is moving into a new product area, or maybe same product area but a different geographic region. And then the more bold step is the M&A is entrepreneurship. This is where companies are stepping out and trying to learn new things, gain new core competencies, generate new synergies, and they do that by buying companies that were very different than them. Early we studied Cisco and its acquisition and development strategy. Clearly a great example of M&As as entrepreneurship as they tried to bring in all these new technologies so that they could develop new products from that. I'm going to use a metaphor that M&As are a little bit like getting married, and it breaks down at some points, but I hope it makes you laugh a little bit and adds a little bit of humor to it. A big part of the M&A is the search phase, and I put up there where you screen and approach the target. And here's why it's tricky. Unlike when you ask a girl out on a date, there's really not much commitment necessarily on that first date. When you approach a company in an M&A, it's dangerously close to asking her to marry you on the first date. So when you do that, you got to do a lot of homework before you ever ask her out on the first date, and that is this idea of screening the target. One of the common ways companies now screen targets is they will try to develop an alliance relationship with them in advance to check them out and to learn more about them, and then later make a decision that we want to acquire them. The reason that this screening and this approach is so important is that the next step is due diligence. And in the due diligence phase, particularly in a friendly M&A bid, the target company is going to have to get fairly undressed, because the acquiring company is going to want to poke and probe in all kinds of areas where you're not interested in. It's almost as if your husband wanted to give you a physical exam before you got married, or your fiance. Not a popular thing to do. And because this due diligence is very revealing to the target company, and you only want to do that if you're serious. And so how that approach went is going to be a big determinant in that. In many cases, the approach is welcomed, but in many other cases, the approach is not welcome. This would be the hostile takeover move. When you have a hostile takeover, the screening is all the more important, because in a hostile takeover, guess what happens to the due diligence phase? It goes away, because the company does not want you to buy them. Therefore, they're not going to want to cooperate with the due diligence phase. In due diligence, you're doing things like getting a good look in the company. Are the processes what you think they are? How are their books? What are their customers like? What is their team like? You're just doing as thorough inspection as you can. The next step in theory is to negotiate the deal. And this is where the detailed negotiation takes place. But there are two things that you ought to know. Usually, to begin due diligence, you have to put some sort of a letter of intent out on the table, which is basically an opening offer. So you've already somewhat made an offer to get to the due diligence phase. Second thing is, statistically, when firms enter a due diligence phase, it almost always ends up with the the merger and acquisition move going through. So due diligence is not proven to be very effective in terms of causing firms to reconsider their decision. And then comes the incredibly important point, now that the marriage has been consummated, so to speak, is you have to live together happily. There was a rationale, underlying rationale for that M&A deal. Now it's your job to go and reap the synergy that we all saw pirate's treasure there. Now it's time to actually find the pirate's treasure and make it work. Let's illustrate some of these points with some very famous mergers and acquisitions. The first one, AOL Time Warner, is so old now that some of you perhaps are not familiar with it, but it goes down as probably the worst M&A of all time. And how that's measured is just how much the companies were worth separately before they merged and how little they became worth shortly after they did merge. And this was an example of M&A as really as entrepreneurship that made so much sense and yet it failed. Remember, this is the days of AOL when dial-up was king, and so the internet portals were key, and Time Warner represented content. So now you've got access, pipes, plus content. How could it not work? And the answer why it didn't work is they didn't work at integrating it. They had very different cultures, and a lot of the leadership left shortly after they did the M&A. The people who'd done the M&A got rich and retired, and the people that were left didn't do a good job. Then you see some up here, some classic M&As as a consolidation. You've got the Exxon Mobil merger. Down towards the bottom of the slide, you've got all of the airline mergers where the airline industry has incredibly consolidated through M&A moves. How about M&As as extensions? I think you could argue Bank of America's acquisition of Merrill Lynch was an example of that. You have Bank of America, a traditional bank, buying Merrill Lynch, which has been more of a investment firm, some investment banking, but largely managing portfolios. You can see the synergies there, but they're somewhat different product lines. And there are many others of these as extensions. You can say perhaps that Lenovo's recent acquisition of Motorola, Lenovo, a computer company that now wants to move into producing cell phone handsets. That makes perhaps an extension move. And you can even see some entrepreneurship moves. A lot of what Facebook has done with its acquisition of Instagram and WhatsApp, and what Google did with its acquisition of YouTube could be labeled as M&As as entrepreneurship. So now the question is, how well does this stuff work? And the way you measure how well it works is you watch what happens to people's stock price over time. And the studies say that the average return to the acquiring company shareholder of an M&A deal is almost exactly zero. Zero. Which is to say it works well for some and really badly for others. So like I said about diversification strategies, there's no panacea here. It's not that doing M&As is a slam dunk good thing, nor is it that it's a slam dunk bad thing. It says that when done well, it can profit. When done poorly, it can kill you. We're going to talk about the keys to success in the next video.